now you get me. That was great. Thanks, y'all. Our second reading this morning comes from Mark's Gospel. We'll be reading from the 12th chapter, verses 28 through 34. Please listen for God's word. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and beside him there is no other, and to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far away from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any question. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What's going on here with this verse? Sounds pretty innocent. Sounds pretty status quo for the Gospel of Mark. Sounds like another church official has approached Jesus and has asked him another tough question in order to maybe trap him or make him look dumb. And perhaps we think that Jesus quickly dispatched with this guy and move on to the next thing, right? Nope, not this time. Something's different this time. Something is different this time. One of the scribes came near and heard scribes and Jesus disputing with one another, and seeing that Jesus had answered them well, this scribe approached him and said, "Which commandment is the first of all?" And then without hesitation, we hear what Jesus says. The first is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and love your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind and with all your strength." And the second is, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." There's no commandments greater than these. This is rough. I've grappled with this text for over a week. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this pulpit caught on fire while I'm talking from it this morning. Had some of our young adults over last night, and I told them to make sure if they came to church to sit in the back. They're back there. It's good. Lest lightning strike. The greatest commandment, the foundation for life of the Christian community. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." No commandment greater. I read this text. I studied this text. I prayed over this text. And I tried to run away from this text. And as I read and I studied and I tried to flee, one thing kept coming into my head. Sesame Street. It was a segment from Sesame Street entitled, "Who are the people in your neighborhood?" It's a great little tune. Who are the people? I'm not going to sing it. Who are the people in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood. Well, then they would proceed to tell you who the people were in your neighborhood, and it was a baker, and a postman, and a fireman, and maybe a librarian or a teacher. It was never the guy who cut you off in traffic. It was never the one who tries to cheat you out of money on the side of the street, panhandling. It was never the person who makes up a story with the intent to make you feel bad. It was never those people, and you can fill in the blanks. And I got to thinking about Jesus' answer in this text, and I asked myself, what is the responsibility that I feel for my neighbor? In fact, who is my neighbor anyway? Who are the people in my neighborhood? And by the way, how do you love God with all of your heart when neighbors are involved? And what in the world does it mean to love my neighbor as myself? How does my love for God truly manifest itself in my day-to-day life? Ugh. The scribe asks an innocent question, and Jesus responds with two authoritative statements. The first one comes in the second part of verse 34, and he says, "You're not far from the kingdom of God." Sort of a climactic thing in nature, but it's typical in a pronouncement type of story. And then the second thing comes in verses 29 through 31 in a much weightier statement. He summarizes the law of the Jewish people. I think it probably could be said that the theme of love does not necessarily flow through Mark's gospel, perhaps in the same way that it does, say, in the Gospel of John. In Mark, the focus on love comes at a very critical moment in the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus' ministry at this point now centers on Jerusalem, and he's set himself against the temple and all the wrong things that are happening within the temple. He's overturned tables in the temple. The religious leaders have all engaged him in debate, and they're angered by his teachings, and they all want to arrest him. And his death at their hands is imminent at this point in Mark's gospel. And in this context, Jesus speaks words whose very particular demands are quite foundational to our faith. This interaction with the scribe in Mark 12 is Jesus' last confrontation with the opponents he faced from the church until he's arrested and prosecuted by them. And in this final confrontation, this final conversation with this scribe, once that conversation is over with, Jesus has silenced everyone. No one dared ask him anything else. So as I tried to run away from this text this week, I realized that the scribe in this passage might have some potential. Jesus thought he had some potential. This scribe didn't seem to be malicious the way that others had. He didn't seem to be deaf or blind in hearing the message of Jesus. And in fact, verse 34 tells us that the scribe himself was impressed by Jesus. He asked him, "What's the greatest commandment? Which one is first of all, Jesus? Tell me." And the answer Jesus gives is a combination of the Shema, which is an ancient commandment from Leviticus. And in answering this way, Jesus brings together two widely separated commands from the law. According to Ched Myers, quoting Vincent Taylor, while each command was warmly received by the rabbis, so far it is known, save Jesus, has brought them together as the two regulative principles which sum up the duty of man. No one's ever brought this up before. No one has ever brought up the passage from Deuteronomy, the Shema, the prayer that we're supposed to recite every day, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and the part of the law from Leviticus 19. No one had ever done that before, ever. Which commandment is the first of all? Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, and your might. These were the words central in the book of Deuteronomy, and they were illustrated in two ways. One way was its location. They're the first words Moses speaks to the Israelite people after the Ten Commandments were given, as the direct word of God to them, and in response to their request for Moses to stand between them and God so they might receive the divine word, and then to teach them. The command begins with the instructions to hear, and then it commands them to love. The location of the Shema also points to its character as a bridge between the commandments and the other instructions given in the statutes and the ordinances. The Shema may be spoken of as a summary of the law of the 10 Commandments. The commandment against worshiping other gods is in every sense the first commandment, the first word, and the Shema is a positive restatement of that very first commandment. It was the touchstone for Israel's life and their faith. Remember it. Say this over and over again. Put it on the forehead. Put it on your hand. Put it on the doors of your homes. It was a prayer that was the plumb line by which their relationship with God was constantly being measured. And it was for this reason that later Judaism set these words to be recited by every Jew each morning and each evening. Don't forget this. It wasn't meant to be pious. It wasn't meant to be legalistic. It was to be a true understanding that those who lived under the rule of the Lord of Israel were to set their lives and shape their daily conduct by these most important and primary words. And this is how Jesus answers that scribe. By quoting this confession of faith, Jesus affirmed, in common with his own Jewish heritage, the oneness of God. The scribe asked, which commandment is the first? And Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy 6:5, the first is to love God. And perhaps this statement receives the fullest treatment. This commandment bases service to God not on any outward compulsion to duty, but on the inner movement of love as a grateful response to God's love for us. Love is the basis of our relationship to God. Jews and Christians both agree that we're to love God with our whole selves. Soren Kierkegaard once said, purity of heart is to will one thing. This evokes the singleness of purpose and the integrity of person to which this word of Moses and Jesus calls his hearer. Mark throws in a little something different than Deuteronomy, though. Mark says to love God with all of your mind as well. And in singling out this intellectual love of God, we should be careful not to elevate it above other dimensions of love. Rather, remember that the text is speaking about loving God with the whole person, with everything you have, every ounce of your being. Which commandment is first of all, Jesus? And then he expands his answer. And he quotes Leviticus. He quotes it in combination with the Shema. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you were to explore Leviticus 19, which I did, I often would say to people who have trouble sleeping at night and fall behind on their quiet time, I will often say, well, why don't you read Leviticus, and it'll put you to sleep, and it counts as a quiet time too. I'm changing my mind about that a little bit. If you explore Leviticus 19, you will find that it includes a vast array of concrete examples of loving your neighbor. Concrete examples. How do I love my neighbor? Here's how. When it comes to Christianity, the love of God and neighbor is to be just like that of Jesus. Not love in word or speech, but in deed and truth. You shall love the neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. This is a powerful verse recalled by Jesus, but its full force isn't noticed really unless you read it in conjunction with the prior verse, which would be 19:17, and read together, the verses comprise a single unit with parallel prohibitions and instructions and rationales. Things that you're not to do, things that you are to do, and why you are to do them. Verse 17, you shall not hate in your heart any one of your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. Verse 18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. Which commandment is the first of all? Love God with everything that you have. Everything, every ounce of your being. Love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbors. What? Who are the people in your neighborhood? Hating somebody in your heart, and we all do it. Hating someone in your heart. That sounds awful when you say it out loud. Hating someone in your heart where emotions might fester into strategies of retribution fueled by anger is forbidden by God. Period. You're not supposed to do it. Jeremiah 15:15 says that the responsibility for vengeance resides with God alone. O Lord, you know, remember me and visit me, and bring down retribution for me on my persecutors. In your forbearance, do not take me away. Know that on your account I suffer insult. Nursing grudges against folks permits anger to seethe until it explodes into uncontrollable rage. To which I honestly said, as I'm looking at this, and can't you forgive me, God? Can't I explode in uncontrollable rage from time to time, please? This is too much to bear. Vengeance and rage and anger can wound the human spirit and fray the fabric of society. Which commandment is the first of all? Jesus is onto something here, and it makes me uncomfortable. First, love God with all of your soul, with everything that you are. And then the neighbor love thing from Leviticus. It's a twofold solution that we should openly reprimand those who have erred, but more importantly, we should love our neighbors as ourselves. The old golden rule. A couple of things about that. The word love implies both attitude and act. We must not only feel love, but also act in ways that translates love into concrete deeds. We can express our love to God verbally all day long. But Jesus says that we must also demonstrate that love by showing love to others, by reaching out to them with tangible deeds of compassion and concern. You have to do something with that love. Matthew 7:12, do to others as you would have them do to you. The word neighbor refers to a wide range of people with whom we might have relationships. And Leviticus 19 breaks that list of neighbors down pretty well. As it was given to the people, Israel was obligated to care for the poor. They were to care for the alien, the random neighbor, the laborer, the deaf people, the blind people. Again, they list the poor and the fellow citizen. That's who your neighbor is, O Israel. Pretty complete list. The list was inclusive, and it indicated that neighbor was not limited to your pals with whom you share social status. It's also the disadvantaged person who has been shoved to the edges of society, the ones who the community is tempted to ignore, perhaps even abuse for political, economic, or physical reasons. Love these people as you love yourself. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. I read a quote that said that because every human being bears the likeness of God, the failure to love others is equivalent to saying that neither they nor we have value in the eyes of God. Are we saying that God has made a terrible mistake if we don't invest human beings with God's divine image? We're all created in God's image. Everybody in this room, everybody outside of this church, everybody that I saw at the fair yesterday, all the trick-or-treaters that came to your house, everyone created in God's divine image. Jesus answered the scribe and basically revealed that all the law and the prophets were based on two things: love God with everything that you have and love your neighbor as yourself. The Apostle Paul exclaims the exact same thing in Galatians 5. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself provides a natural link to the gospel, doesn't it? Jesus not only knew the law as he answered the scribe, but he also was showing that he knew that the human ability to do what is right is rooted in a proper and right relationship with God. We're made in the image of God, and therefore we are to share in God's holiness, and God has placed within us the tools we need to do his will. If we are to be holy as God is holy, where does that leave the people in our neighborhood? How are we to act ethically with those around us? How are we to love others around us? And maybe the first step is to recognize that holiness. And to do that, we must acknowledge that holiness is a term reserved for God alone. God is holy. God is set apart from everyone and everything else. God is different. God is independent. However, at the same time, God also chooses to be with us. And God chooses to live among us. God intends for us to be holy too. 1 Peter 1. As he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all of your conduct. For it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And then there's love. Love demonstrates itself